Hello and welcome to the second episode of the 01581 Let's Talk. Today I'm joined by Kristi Williams, our town manager, and Senator Michael Moore. Welcome.
Thank you.
So excited. We're going to get to some really interesting content in just a moment, but because it's new, just want to remind viewers that the purpose of this show is to provide information on a variety of topics that the Westborough community finds of interest. We'll talk about hot topics, we'll talk about general government, maybe not so hot sometimes, but a variety of topics. And I do hope that you'll enjoy the show, that you'll find value in it. We'll be joined on a weekly basis by the town manager's office, a representative, if it's not Kristi, and then a special guest. So with that, let's get right into the show. So Kristi, welcome.
Thank you.
And you are here to give us an update from your office. So what do you have for us?
Well, this week, as everyone can probably guess, we're very focused on town meeting, which is on Saturday, March 25th at 9 a.m. at the high school. So hoping to get a big turnout of voters. Last year was our first year officially doing the 9 a.m. start, and I know that it went pretty long, late into the night. So just a reminder to folks that we're going to do a working lunch. There's a dinner break around 5:30, but that's obviously at the discretion of the voter. And then we have 39 articles, so we have a lot of work to do.
We have a lot of work to do. And so let's talk about the important things. So there will be lunch available for purchase on site. So that's the working lunch, but folks can bring their own. The Women's Club always has a bake sale. That's very important.
Yes.
So they'll be there. And then what happens if we go long? Presumably we will be on Saturday, is my guess.
We might, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
okay, all right, sorry to jinx it.
Who knows?
Already.
So if we don't finish all of our business on Saturday, then we would go to Monday night. Usually around 7 o'clock start.
Okay, great. All right, and what are we going to talk about at town meeting?
So I pulled out some of the articles I thought might be interesting. The budget, I think, is the biggest article. So Article 4 on the town meeting warrants. We're proposing a budget of an increase of 5.72%. So when we kind of break that down on the town side, it's about 5.17% increase, and then for the schools about 4.1. So just kind of going through quickly that increase for the town.
What are the biggest drivers there?
So we settled 3 union contracts that actually expired over a year ago. So that the increase in those salaries have 2 COLAs, so the fiscal 23 COLA as well as the fiscal 24. So that's a big driver in funding those articles or those contracts. We have some additional positions. So we have a firefighter paramedic position that we're trying to add, sustainability coordinator / community development assistant. That's actually partly paid for by a grant. So we're excited about that.
For a year, right?
Yep. We have a part-time animal control position. 38% of that is paid for by Grafton because we do share that that work with them. We have 2 positions in the DPW, so a tree position and sewer, and then a networks systems administrator position in IT, which was actually recommended by our IT assessment. So,
okay, great. And we have a number of investments in capital, right?
Yes.
So Chris Pant will be a popular topic of conversation, and DPW, right? Lots of investment there, and a number of other items. So that's always certainly of interest, I think. But it's important, I think, that we continue to be able to invest in our capital while still maintaining our great rating and staying within our fiscal policy.
Right. So Article 10 on the town meeting is the capital plan, and that actually has articles, sub-articles A through P. So many purchases of equipment, vehicles. There's some IT infrastructure that we want to invest in, some security cameras. So lots of different articles. A lot of them propose to use free cash for that.
Right. And those will be voted on individually because they are sub-articles, right?
Right.
Okay, great. What else?
So just wanted to highlight the town website update. That is Article 18 of the town meeting warrant. We're really excited about that. It's a great communication tool for us, and we think that enhancing it will really be helpful in terms of communicating with the public, getting things organized, really making it easier for people to access information. So really excited about that.
And at our last select board meeting, Mark Stockman, who heads up our IT department, gave a great overview so if folks are interested, they can go back and watch that.
Yes.
But the enhancements are so needed. I mean, right now the search function on our website just doesn't work. So if you're kind of not sure what you're looking for, but you generally want to search for something, you can't even do that. And transparency, as we know, has become so much more important, in government, and it's important, like, as we engage the public, right? Because we want the public to understand what's going on, but if we can't do that in a way that's easy and quick and fast, we sort of lose them. So I'm wholly supportive of that article.
Yeah, and sort of in the same vein as the zoning articles that we have on the warrant. Really getting organized. We had a company come in and look at the zoning articles and renumbering and reorganization is one of the articles on the warrant that will translate into them going into sort of an easier, more searchable database on the town website. So really working in a lot of areas to try to make it easier for people to access information.
Yeah, and this is just more of a continuation of what we've done as a town. We, in our community development department, Permit Pro has really been expanded to include conservation, the fire department, obviously the whole permitting process, the planning department, and so we're seeing more and more, investment in technology. Although that even feels like an old term now, but, to certainly make public record management, I think, easier and certainly more transparent. So it's all good. It's very good. Good. And I know you're not here to talk about the school budget, but everyone certainly is, always interested. What is that? What the school budget is going up by what percent? Do you know?
Yep. So that's 4.1% increase for schools.
And they too settled a number of contracts, I believe, as part of that.
They're working through contracts. Yeah. So
okay.
So
great. Yep. And let's see, anything else that we need to talk about on? Yeah, go. Yeah, please jump. Yeah, of course you can.
Quick, I just know how'd the town elections go?
Great.
They went great. So we had contested races for school committee and library trustees, not for select board. So Ian Johnson was elected to his 17th term or something, whatever it is. No, so he'll join us again, or he's joined us again. And so it was actually a pretty good turnout.
We had a really good turnout.
The polls were steady all day. I mean, I think the top vote getters were at like around 1,500 votes. So, always want to see that number higher, but for a local election that, isn't benched against any other
Which is
offices.
funny, the local election has more direct impact on people, but gets the smallest turnout.
Right.
And your library trustees, that went well?
Yep. So again, that was a contested race, and so but all the seats have been filled, so they're off and running, and they have an article actually on the town warrant. So you may recall that there was at last town meeting. There were two town meetings for a massive library renovation.
Yes.
Both of those failed, but they are bringing back a more what I'll call a consolidated project, really around specifically around repairs that are code type related, and I think the article is around $400,000 or a little.
Yeah, it's about 360, and it'll fund design. So
certainly necessary work. There's no doubt about that. But so good.
Great.
Awesome. Great. Kristi, well, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for agreeing to be a regular guest, and look forward to future updates. We'll pause for just a moment, and we'll come right back with the senator. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. So I am joined here by our exclusive guest, Senator Michael Moore. Welcome.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever been referred to as exclusive guest.
Well, you're exclusive now because Kristi left.
Okay, all right.
So actually, Senator Moore is going to be a regular guest on this show. We'll see him monthly, assuming his schedule allows, and I'm really excited to have him. You're a relatively new face to Westborough, so I'm going to take a few minutes just to kind of read your bio and intro, just so viewers are familiar. So Senator Moore represents the 2nd Worcester District, comprised of Auburn, Grafton, Millbury, Shrewsbury, Westborough, and a portion of Worcester. He was born and raised in nearby Millbury,
Yes.
a graduate of the Waltham Police Academy.
Yes, many years ago.
Many years ago, I
Yeah.
won't say how many, but you served for over 20 years in law enforcement, eventually moving to be part of an investigator in the Massachusetts Attorney General Office. Very interesting. And you moved in, continued sort of that law enforcement vein, working for the Worcester County Sheriff's Office. And in the meantime, you started your humble political beginnings as a selectman.
Yes.
In 2001, I think. So serving 3 terms.
Which and I always tell this when I go to career days.
Yeah.
If I look back at my forecasting my career, politics was never, as a candidate, was never actually in my career path.
Yeah.
It's never something I said, someday I'm going to do this.
This is
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's I always tell kids, keep every option open because you never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, well, you really have dedicated your life to public service in one
Yes,
way or another. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you. Well, very excited, excited for viewers to get to know you a bit more. This is a busy time of year for you.
Yes.
You've got a really aggressive legislative agenda and some priorities, and I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. All right, great. Thank you. Well, so for legislation, some of the ones I'm focusing on, so I had 88 bills that I filed. Now, a good portion of those 88 bills are refiles,
Okay.
and some of those refiles include, I don't know if people are following what's going on with PFAS.
It's a big topic here. Actually, one of the items we didn't talk about that would be that's on the town meeting warrant is a design and construction project for 2 of our wells that have been offline because of PFAS. And so we've applied to the state's, I forget the long acronym, but the process for like a low interest, no interest loan. So it's very, very relevant here in Westborough.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't want to say funny, but when I first filed this legislation, not last session, the session before that, I had never, and I think like most of the public, I had never heard of PFAS.
Sure, yeah.
And then I had some environmental advocacy groups come to me and started educating me on what's in our packaging that we never knew about.
Right.
So my first piece of legislation that got me involved in this was prohibiting PFAS in our food manufacturing packaging.
Yep.
And then at that point, we had a colleague of mine, Senator Julian Sear from the Cape.
Yep.
He was filing a piece of legislation to create a task force to study, have a comprehensive study of this and how to move forward legislatively.
Sure.
And then we had our current auditor, Senator Diana DiZaglio. She actually had a piece of legislation that would prohibit PFAS from being in our firefighting equipment. I don't think people realize that our firefighters have a high rate of cancer, and it turns out now the foam suppression that they use contains PFAS. The equipment that they wear contains PFAS. So she was the main sponsor, and I co-sponsored that the previous session. Both those bills, neither one of them passed the first session, but Senator Sear's legislation did pass, creating
For the task force.
force.
Okay.
So the task force now last session came out with a comprehensive report and is recommending, they've actually now drafted legislation. So based on that study, my piece of legislation and hers, and actually another piece that the Firefighting Association of Mass, the PFFMA, came to me on, is to create a fund that would look at further studying, research and studying of that. So 2 of the 3 are contained in the comprehensive piece, which I think should hopefully get past this session.
Great.
And I'm going to try for the 3rd piece.
Yeah.
So that's one of the major focuses I have this session. Another piece is 5 years ago, the Senate President appointed me to a task force looking at eye care for kids. Now, I think this is one of the things that we all take for granted.
I was just going to say, okay, right. I
So-
mean, I remember reading the legislative item, that you're working on, and I was thinking, really?
Well, that's what I said. I was like, okay, this seems like it's, what are we going to do?
Right.
But so apparently, what I learned is that every child that has to go to school, I think we all knew had to go for an eye exam.
Yep.
Then the results are given to the school, but then there's no follow-up.
Right.
So, we're trying to address the achievement gap, the learning gap, but there's no follow-up to make sure that the child actually gets, if they need glasses, that they actually get glasses so that
Yeah,
they
so they
can
do the test and it's just kind of as part of the record because
Yeah.
it's a requirement.
Yeah, so we're actually looking at creating a registry or a database for that to
Great.
make sure there's follow through, to make sure that the children are getting access to the preventative care,
Yep.
so that they
Yep.
can read and hopefully be successful in school.
Sure. Sounds pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah. So then there's another piece of legislation that was actually, you would think this would be a no-brainer, but it's entitled "Enact Building More Accessible Massachusetts." And basically what we have is we have certain areas of the workplace in public buildings that do not have to be accessible to people with disabilities.
Okay.
So,
Can you give us an example? of
or you
one
could go
maybe?
into a workplace where the workplace itself, where they have to work, is accessible.
Okay.
Then you go to a break room or an employee area
Okay.
where they can go for their lunch breaks,
Yep.
or they can go for
Sure.
what other purposes.
Yep.
That doesn't have to be.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
so again, you would think this would be something easy to pass, but it's been pending for 3 terms. We thought we had it. We did have it as part of the economic development bill that was passed, that the Senate had passed last July.
Sure.
But then I think, for the public that doesn't know, we ended up, the House passed the version, the Senate passed the version, and this is one of the pieces that didn't get finalized before the end of the session.
Is it a budgetary concern? I mean, is that, I mean,
Costs.
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So
so
cost to actually, for municipalities to implement it.
municipalities
workplaces.
or to the private
Yeah.
private companies
Yeah.
to go in there, renovate the areas to make them more accessible. So
Is there, if it passes, is there a requirement of it must be done by certain time, or is it?
oh yeah, there's an implementation
Yep,
period.
yep.
So it's not just like day one, tomorrow you got to get it done.
Yep.
So any sort of legislation that we pass that has any sort of infrastructure
Sure.
renovation
There's
work,
a-
you need to have a ramp up time so
Yep.
that they can do that.
Okay.
So
Great.
then the other piece, and I think I was telling
Yeah.
you before this, that just came about within the last year. The title of it is "An Act Establishing an Internal Special Audit Unit within the Cannabis Control Commission."
Yep.
Basically, what happened is I had so as Shelby stated, my district now consists of the towns of Auburn, Millbury, Grafton, Shrewsbury, and Worcester. Well, that's with the redistricting. Previously, the last 2 years, or the last 12 years, I had represented also the town of Leicester.
Yep.
So I had a constituent who was opening a cannabis manufacturing facility.
Okay.
And as per the law, they purchased, it was a grow facility,
Okay.
so they purchased some clone product, so clone plants,
Okay.
that when they got the product to the plant, they did the testing as they're supposed to. Well, they found that it contained a prohibited pesticide.
Okay.
And per regulation, they then had to notify the Department of Agriculture,
Okay.
MDR, so they did that. Well, that was the beginning of the nightmare.
Okay.
At that point, it went from almost like they were being the person who did something inappropriate, though the company did something inappropriate. MDI comes out, does an investigation. The investigation is this long, lengthy investigation, which the company ends up getting sanctioned.
Wow. Even though they just received this product and had no control.
Correct.
Wow.
And then from MDR, it goes, now MDR then has to send their investigation to the Cannabis Control Commission.
Okay.
And again, the nightmare continued. At that point, there was very little communication between the CCC and even the method or procedures that the investigators used during this whole investigation.
Okay.
Now you've got a plant that this individual is saying that with investors, $60, $70 million.
Yeah.
They've got employees who are now on the payroll. Every time we reached out, I would reach out to the CCC, Cannabis Control Commission, about, look, can you just do the inspection?
Yep.
They it just got delayed and delayed.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to a point where he ended up, they're waiting for a final inspection, and every call I would make to say, look, I'm not asking you to take care of the company.
Yeah,
I'm
just
saying,
do the inspection.
Just do the inspection.
Yep.
It kept getting delayed. They end up having to where they had to lay off 10 to 12 people before Thanksgiving.
Wow.
He almost lost his investors.
Sure.
So the company almost had to close.
Wow.
And then based on various discussions I had
Yep.
within the agency, it turns out there was really a lack of investigative audit procedures.
I was just going to say, it sounds like there were some major breaks in the process.
There really was.
Yeah.
And then again, now the company, this all started with a pesticide. In October or November, the CCC and the MDR announced that pesticides were now, certain pesticides were now being taken off the prohibited list. So, and then I reached out to them and said, look, so what's the status of this? Well, we're not even sure about this one yet.
Oh my God.
There was so much confusion. And then there's an issue with, you have the Cannabis Control Executive Director statute, what his responsibilities are. And then you have the chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission, what their responsibilities are exactly the same.
Yeah.
Now, some people say that's a conflict, but
Yeah.
it really isn't, because you have the executive director that handles the day-to-day activities
Sure.
of the regulatory agency,
Yeah.
but then but he reports to the commission. So it turns out there was an internal battle between the two, where they were actually, since last April, they've been in mediation to try to determine who has what control and responsibility.
Wow.
So,
Well, and some of this, I would say, is not to be unexpected, because it's still relatively new, right? So, I mean, I'm not forgiving anything
Right.
but some of that is to be expected, that some of those have to be worked out. But it sounds like, it's
some
excessive.
things, but this is
Yeah.
just the fact that you can't internally,
Yeah.
we can't get an
You gotta get it
organizational
right.
control.
Yeah.
So this basically what this would do
So create
is
an internal audit.
right. So, and we've done this with the Department of Transportation, and also when we had all the problems with the state police. This was one of the reforms that we had implemented.
Sure.
So now you'd have a unit that's employed by the Inspector General's office, hired by them, overseen by them, but they would actually work out of the Cannabis Control Commission, and they would make sure there's transparency in how the investigations are done, the management of the agency, the organizational structure.
Well, this is a
So-
good example of the layers, right? The
Yes.
layers and the necessary layers. But we have to understand, when we create commissions and things, that there are inevitably always other layers and oversight that has to be created as well. It costs money.
Yeah, and from when we're legislators are calling and just saying, look, just can we get some more timely type of investigations? We're getting back that, well, we know we're an independent authority. So almost like there was a lack of control or oversight. It's
Sure.
like, well, obviously we have to change the culture.
Sure. So I should know this, but I don't. So is the commission? Are they appointed positions?
The commission are appointed, and it's, the auditor gets an appointment. The auditor gets an appointment. The treasurer, the governor, and the attorney general's office. I think the governor may get multiple appointments. So they all have people that they appoint to the commission, and they all have specific roles. Like one person's supposed to be relative to public health.
Yep.
And so,
Sure. Yeah, different areas of focus.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay. Interesting.
And like there is some criticism that the commission should have been set up more like the ABCC, Alcohol Beverage Control Commission, that oversee our liquor and package stores and
Sure.
bars,
Yep.
rather than the format that was used was the organizational structure of the Gaming Commission.
Well, and
So-
correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a lot of opposition back. I think it was question 4 back in the day, as I recall. For some reason, there's a lot of opposition here in Westborough to that, and I believe it didn't pass here in Westborough. But correct me if I'm wrong. But it was the proponents that effectively created the construct of the commission.
Yes, and this is one issue when we have with referendums, is that they write it.
Yep.
You may get us. I mean, in general,
Yep.
I can't remember since I've been in office any referendum that hasn't passed. I know in the past there's been some that voter
Sure.
initiative referendums that the legislature doesn't then pass.
Right.
So you may see us tinker with it a little bit.
Yep.
The only thing we couldn't tinker with was the last fair share amendment, because that was actually a constitutional
Gotcha.
amendment.
Yeah.
So we modified it a little bit to hopefully make it more efficient and something that can really regulate the industry more efficiently. But,
Sure. Well, and that's what we see here. And we have actually a couple citizen. We had one item that was going to be on the town meeting that was going to be a citizen's petition, but to really kind of help and frame the, I'll say, sort of implementation, assuming it passes. It's actually a crossing flash crosswalk flashing light downtown.
Okay.
The select board said rather than it coming before as a citizen's petition where we really have no control of it, right? It just goes on. We worked with the resident, and now the select board is sponsoring it. But it is interesting depending upon the track of how something comes through, how it can change the process. One of the items, just to move along here in the interest of time, so I do see that one of your articles is or acts is to establish a commission to study energy rates.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's certainly something that's part of, it feels like every kitchen table conversation these days.
So every time you think in the 14 years, every time I think I've heard every issue, there's always a new issue comes up.
Sure.
So this actually ties into the broader issue of climate change. In Massachusetts, we've been a strong advocate that we've got to get our renewable energy, fossil fuels. We have to reduce those.
Yep.
But part of the problem we have is that our power plants, utilities, are powered by natural gas.
Yep.
And we haven't been expanding their infrastructure to bring in more natural gas.
Yep.
So that has resulted in now that we have to transport more natural gas in, ship more natural gas in. Well, we all know what's the tragedies that's going on over the Ukraine right now in Europe. So that's at that time it was increasing. The projected costs were being increased for the shipping of natural gas in there. So National Grid, Eversource, and from the third company.
That's okay.
Unitil. They were projecting. Well, National Grid was projecting a 62% increase. Eversource was projecting a 50% increase, and that had to do with the projected cost increase for natural gas being shipped
But I
in.
think the town manager just said our projected electricity rate is going up. I don't have it in front of me. It was something like 37%.
Yeah, which is far less than what it was originally projected.
Right. But I mean, even that was like I'm sorry. Can you say that number again?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's crazy. But go ahead. Sorry.
So basically, when he started looking into this, the current governor, who when she was AG, we were reaching out to her office on how do we try to reduce that cost or maybe get some more controls.
Sure.
So at that point, myself and a representative from Springfield, we put a letter together that we sent out to all our colleagues, and we had roughly over 100 senators and representatives that sent a letter to the Public Utilities Commission objecting to these rate increases. But also at that time, we had learned from dealing with the Attorney General's office and actually our conversations with National Grid and Eversource that the municipal power companies, when they go to make a procurement, they can do a procurement on a long-term basis.
Okay. Yep.
The three major companies have to do it every 6 months. So even if you if you see rates that are advantageous to the consumer, they can't do a long-term bid.
Interesting.
So basically what this would do is this legislation would create a task force to look at that, to see if there's some way we can change the process of procurement. So
interesting.
And there's also, so this is why a lot of you'll see like those small municipal power companies, they weren't having the huge increases.
Right.
Another thing we did too with this is we were looking at we weren't going to be able to do anything with the expected increases. So we have language in there that would establish a deferment process, that if you had to defer your payments because they were so high, you could defer them. And also there'd be a prohibition on any sort of interest during that prohibition, during that deferment.
During the deferment.
So we were trying to find a way to try to
help
make
the
it
actual consumer. Yeah,
So-
great. All right, so let's see here. So we've got just a few minutes left, but one of the things I want to talk to you about is, and have you provide us an update with, is the changes here in Westborough as it relates to the Sharp building and the build out of that project for emergency assistance. The town has done, I think, a great job of creating an FAQ to answer some of the questions. I know you've been very involved in lots of conversations with our town manager, our superintendent, others. So thank you very much for being part of that. But
No, it's my pleasure.
yeah, what do you want to tell your constituents here about that project?
Well, just as you just kind of did the overview, that yes, DHCD did come in. They chose a location that was with no. There was no solicitation by my office or the town.
Yeah, sure.
We have.
They own the building.
Yep, they own the building. We have a housing crisis.
Yep.
We have a crisis. There is state funds that are being proposed that are sitting in the supplemental budget right now. That is in a conference committee.
Okay.
Well, the House passed the version. We passed the version. They're trying to work out some differences, and that funding is to come back to the cities and towns that are going to be housing these facilities, so that help with the cost of transportation and.
And that's one of the
in the
biggest
schooling.
costs, the transportation, because the idea is to keep students in their, the schools they were in, correct?
Yes, yep.
Even if they're living here in Westborough, let's say they were going to school in Grafton, that the idea would be that they still have to be transported there.
Yes,
And
yep.
and that's incumbent upon the towns to provide, but this funding would help
And
with
there's
that.
also going to be additional costs to the town
Sure.
for the students that go to the schools.
Absolutely.
There. Part of the goal is that they would be looking at having families housed there that have some sort of connection to Westborough or to the surrounding area.
Sure.
So they're not trying to bring people in from from
Yeah,
Pittsfield or
wherever,
North Adam,
right,
someplace
right.
close to here.
Yep.
They are looking at making this a permanent shelter, or I shouldn't say shelter, permanent housing.
Permanent housing.
And it's looking at about 20 people, 20 families that
20
would be in
families.
there. But they are trying, and again, I have to stress this, we don't get any approval or say on what they are going to do for a policy or implementation, and the town doesn't either. But I think they have been good at trying to reach out to the town
Yep.
and work with the town and on the implementation process.
Yeah, well, I think what, I certainly want Westborough residents and businesses to know that the town has been very involved
Yes.
in the process,
Yep.
regular, multiple conversations
Yes,
during
many meetings.
many meetings,
Yeah.
and that will continue. And there will be supportive services wrapping around
Yes.
these individuals and their
So
families.
So
Yeah.
SMOC will be running the program,
Yep.
and they do have, SMOC does have, as part of their operations, they have career development programs, so
Great.
hopefully we can get work programs and
That'd be great. Let's,
Yeah.
folks
So-
coming here, plenty of opportunity to work if they're able to, and that would be great.
I think people should realize this does, and it does highlight it I think often we hear about the housing crisis,
Mm-hmm.
but we never really, until we see it in our backyard, we don't realize that how bad it actually is.
Yeah,
So-
no question about it, and we're seeing that pressure come west, and we do have a number of homeless families, individuals
Yeah.
here in Westborough. So although we are a comfortable, often considered affluent town, make no mistake that there are those that are far less fortunate that are living among us. So
Go ahead.
and
If you want to,
Yep.
I never realized this, I guess, until I took office, that living in a suburb of the city,
Mm-hmm.
you, just as you say, you said, you don't realize how many people are actually in need.
Yep.
But when you started looking, this ties into the universal food for the schools that
Sure.
we've been
Yep.
funding and hopefully going to continue to fund. Do you actually look at the demographics of every town? There's 20-30% of the students
Yep.
at a minimum that are receiving the reduced or free meals.
Absolutely.
That really shows the need, and it's really been increased over the last with the cost of living.
Yep.
The need for this.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of communities that people don't realize how many of their community members are actually in need right now.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, we've heard that pressure from our food pantry.
Yes,
Numbers are up. They're doing a food drive this coming weekend.
Oh,
so,
okay.
but they are their numbers for requests are up, and some very difficult stories. So
Yeah,
that
no,
they
it is.
receive, but they do a great job. So, so we are just about out of time. But I'm excited that you will be back as a regular guest. We'll get into a rhythm here for you to provide us updates. We had like about 30 pages of information we could have talked about. We could go on and on, but I do want to thank you. This is great, and I also want to let viewers know that Senator Moore will be having monthly office hours at the Senior Center. They are beginning actually Wednesday. March 22nd, that would be tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for about an hour. You don't have to make an appointment, just stop in, and transportation, of course, is always available. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewers and our listeners for tuning into the 01581 Let's Talk. Look forward to seeing you and connecting with you on the next show. Thank you.